I'm Haze Hartwig. This is Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today, what we're going to be covering is some of the stats that happened for March. And on the show with us today, we have Ken, who's also from Vancouver Rent-It, and he's going to go through some of the stats with us and sort of have some insights. So just generally what's going on in the property management world there. So welcome to the show, Ken.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries, man. So how long have you been with VRI and in the property management game? Because you've been in it longer than I have, actually.
I have, yeah. I've been doing this for coming close to 10 years now. I began when I was 25 years old. So yeah, it's coming up to 10 years.
For sure, it's quite some time. Were you always with VRI or did you start somewhere else?
No, I had my first gig in VR and everything worked out and I've stayed. I've grown the team and right now we have 5 property managers and I think we're looking to expand. So no, this is my first and only gig.
Yeah, that's good. Definitely built a pretty solid team, I think. I mean, you're dual licensed as well, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I have
Yeah.
my sales and my property management license, but just like yourself, I think we utilize a lot more of the property management side.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I find for myself at least, I'm about a 50-50. That's a sort of my plan there to make sure that I keep everything going, and you're multi-generational in property management as well, right?
Yeah, my family, my father, to be specific, he was a realtor by trade for the first 20 years of his career. And
Okay.
then he eventually purchased enough properties to sustain his lifestyle and retired his sales license and just did property management himself.
Nice. Well, that's pretty good then.
Yeah.
So I guess what we'll do, we'll get into some of these stats here. So it's interesting because Greater Vancouver, the average price of a one bedroom has actually fallen again for the second month, this time a little bit more than last. So it's gone down 43 for the greater Vancouver area. However, it is still up from March of last year, which is at 352 more this year than it was last year. And of course, Vancouver proper and West Van did have a modest increase of 2% over that. Now, do you notice over your years that there's sort of that sunshine tax where when it starts to get nicer being by the beaches, that downtown Vancouver kind of blows up, or is that just sort of a one that I've noticed on my own?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, in my experience, throughout the years, we go through ups and downs. In certain years, in certain periods of, deflation, so I say, when there's a lot of activity happening in the economy, prices do tend to spike up, but at a very constant level.
Mm-hmm.
Way back when I'm talking 2016, 2017, used to see prices spike, I would say during spring to about November, and those were more seasonal trends, throughout the city itself. But I think in recent year, to answer your question, the prices have been constant. It's not necessarily a sunshine tax on any particular part of the city.
Mm-hmm. Now, when like all that COVID stuff sort of lifted in that, did you notice? I mean, we saw a mass exodus of people out of the city. Do you see that all coming back now? Like, have you seen a? I mean, obviously, you're a couple of years past it, but did you see everyone come back? Do you think that's part of what's going on with keeping Vancouver kind of on the upward trajectory, or what do you figure is causing that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, during COVID, there was a lot of people that were leaving the downtown core per se. People
Mm-hmm.
were wanting more space, so they moved to the burbs, right, to the east. And I mean, in Vancouver itself, for people who don't know what we are geographically,
Yeah.
we are landlocked on the west side, so you can only really go east or north. But even seeing that, the prices haven't necessarily come down. It's rebounded. I think
Yeah.
about a year after COVID, everything more or less rebounded.
Yeah, it's interesting with the prices. Like as Vancouver has had a modest increase, and everywhere else was kind of there's a bit of a modest decrease for most of the surrounding cities, Burnaby, New West, etc. Except for some reason, Coquitlam had a quite large decrease and went down 11%, which is very out of the ordinary. And of course, I mean, these are all averages, so it's not the gospel. It doesn't mean that whatever the number is given that that's 100% where it is. But it's kind of interesting how like different pockets sort of seem to adjust differently. And I mean, you have a fair amount of properties in downtown Vancouver, correct?
Downtown Vancouver, more so now Burnaby and I would say North Burnaby.
Okay.
That like these three areas have boomed, in the last couple of years. And just going back to your point about Coquitlam, I do believe that downward trend might have been due to just the increase of supply that happened, during a certain period. New buildings complete, hundreds of units come on the market, and it gets a bit more competitive. So it's just a classic case of supply and demand.
For sure. So, it's funny that you mentioned about like numerous units coming on, and there obviously being some competition for those units. As a property manager, or even a DIY, do-it-yourself landlord, what would be some good tips to help sort of differentiate yourself and get yourself rented? Because I mean, obviously, a brand new building, there's 14 one-bedrooms. Why yours?
Very good question. I mean, I'll use the example of a brand new building. When a building completes, you're going to be fighting with professionals like ourselves, marketing certain units, and also mom and pops that are just listing their properties that they want to rent out. What really differentiates us from other people, or just tips for normal landlords, is to really just take nice photos, write a proper description, and answer emails. I mean, when people want to see it, they reply, and you have the window of, I would say, less than 40 hours to get a showing going. Otherwise, people lose interest and they move on because there's that fear of missing out, right? Both from the landlord's perspective and also from a tenant perspective. When someone wants to see it, they want to see it in the next day or so.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's it's funny that you mentioned with the email. One of the things that I talk to when we have incoming tenants, and they always tell us like, wow, you got back to us so quickly. We've sent off messages to numerous other ones and we like still haven't heard back from them. And we're already booking a showing. So it's quite a good point that you bring up there that you should respond to your emails or text or whatever method you're using right away. So I think that's a really good thing to sort of touch base on that for sure. You also mentioned about the photos. Now, obviously, we see a bunch of photos throughout our tours there and looking around and all that. What would you say, like, do you think people should use and hire a professional photographer, or what are your views on that?
Preferably, I mean, we have an eye for good photos, so we know what, the renter wants to view. I can't say for mom and pops to do themselves, but having nice photos does definitely make your listing stand out. In addition to photos, of course, what our team does is we do video tours, virtual tours, and so on and so forth to maximize that exposure for our landlords. But in short, having appealing advertisement is the first step, right? You want people
Oh,
to click your ads, and you really want to stand out from the rest.
oh yeah, absolutely. And now, when you're talking about the virtual tours, do you mean just like walking around with the camera, or like the ones that are kind of more primarily used for the real estate sales side of it, or what exactly are you meaning by virtual tours?
Yeah, good question. It's a combination of both. We are very innovative in our team, and during COVID, it kind of pushed us to have to use these technology that's available at our disposal.
Yeah.
For myself, I mean, we do a lot of virtual tours, so I do video walkthroughs. Do it properly, do it in depth. Certain properties requires more insight than others. For
Hmm.
example, you would do like a 2 minute video tour for a condo, one bedroom condo, but you would have to go through a very in-depth 5 to 10 minute walkthrough for a house that's in Western Vancouver. So the different property requires different techniques, and you can also do virtual tours such as Matterport that is seen more predominant in sales. For someone who's overseas or someone that's not in the city, having that is invaluable. You just send them the link, they have a look at it. It's almost like they're there for showing themselves.
Oh yeah, for sure, right? And that makes sense. And one of the tips, I mean, I touched on with Peter last month when we were doing the stats and that when you're going to do your video, if you're doing it yourself, slow down. I've seen some of these at home ones, and man, I was getting dizzy.
Yeah, we have our technique. I mean, without saying too much, we use gimbals. It smooths everything out when we do upload and edit it. That way it's viewable. So,
Okay.
technology nowadays, wide lens. I mean, that gives you a good idea of what the space feels like without distorting it. Certain techniques like that, and also just editing, overall editing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think taking the time to like really edit down things is um, kind of a lost art for some people. They're just trying to churn things out. So yeah, it's kind of interesting for that. So going on with more of the stats there, the reason why we use a one bedroom obviously is because that's sort of like the base. We know that a two bedroom is going to be more than a one bedroom and a three bedroom, so on and so forth. And that so the price per square foot is basically started to return a little bit back to normal, with Vancouver being number one at 3.85, Burnaby at $3.25, North Van at 3.17, and New West actually coming ahead of West Van for price per square foot at $3.08, which is kind of an odd thing, but I think that New West is probably benefiting a little bit more simply for the fact that they have 5 SkyTrain stations in them. So if you don't drive, it's a lot easier to commute from New West back to downtown by just jumping on a train and reading your book. So it's a little bit of that. Have you noticed, Ken, about the more people are coming to Burnaby simply for the fact that they're kind of pushed out of Vancouver into sort of Vancouver adjacent?
Yes and no. I predominantly deal with the newer buildings in Burnaby,
Mm-hmm.
and so the clientele, the people who are looking to rent, they're there because it's new. We've gotten numerous feedback saying that they just don't need to be in downtown, and so downtown properties aren't as new, and don't have as many amenities as, for example, master plans in Metrotown or in Brentwood, where they have everything you need there. The cinema, the grocers, all the gym and pools, and also AC. AC is a huge one. I think in the last 5 years, any new building that was built here in Vancouver are required to have air conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And downtown, it's already saturated with older buildings, right? So for what it's worth, a lot of people they do see that as a incentive for them to move out of downtown into a newer, more established neighborhood like Metrotown or Brentwood.
Yeah, I guess so that after we experienced that heat dome, uh, people are definitely more interested in air conditioning than they were before.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So between Brentwood and Metrotown, have you noticed, like, I mean, before Brentwood wasn't really that big of a deal, but there's been obviously a heap of construction and upgrading and master planning and all this sort of thing. Has Brentwood caught up to and or surpassed Metrotown, do you figure, or is Metrotown still sort of the crown jewel?
It used to be that Metrotown, pricing wise, was the crown jewel, but in more recent years, Brentwood and Metrotown, they're aligned. Mind you, how we determine pricing or how the market determines pricing, it's based on a lot of various, figures and, reasoning, right? And
Mm-hmm.
some people they love Brentwood for the fact that it's more of a transportational hub for people that are from the east who take the SkyTrain line over there versus the older SkyTrain line where Metrotown is established. But at the same time, some people may argue saying that Town is much more convenient because it's an older city
Mm-hmm.
in a way where they have all the entertainment, the malls, all the establishments already there, right? So
Okay.
to answer your question, really, I mean, it used to be at one point Town was almost the pinnacle of the highest pricing in Burnaby, and now it's aligned with each other. So there's definitely growth in Brentwood as well.
Okay. Yeah. So they're kind of, I guess, sort of almost matching, would you say?
I would say if you're comparing apples to apples, one bedrooms or two bedrooms, there's the prices are high. The
Yeah.
prices are the same.
Okay. Yeah, this is kind of an interesting thing. So obviously, with the rentals, I'm sure that any idiot can figure out that apartments are leading with the type of property that's available, with 77% in the greater Vancouver area of rentals are apartments with almost even split. One bedrooms are at 40% and two bedrooms at 46% as far as it goes in that 77 of all the rentals there. Now, as far as you've seen, is it easier to rent a two bedroom or a one bedroom, or what's your kind of your experience with that?
It depends on how you see things. It I would say one bedrooms are still easier to some extent. We do find that more and more people are looking at two bedrooms just for the size benefit.
Hmm.
But that has some downfalls. I mean, there are people who are looking to cram as many people into two bedrooms as they can, just because once they split the price of the rent, it does work well with the occupancy, a number, right? One bedrooms, you're going to have limitations, so it's usually going to be a single person, a dual occupancy, like a couple, or in some cases you might have a dual occupancy with a newborn, so like a young family, and that's usually like the maximum that's allowable in one bedrooms, both in the bylaws and also just out of ethics. Like you don't want more than three people living in a one bedroom space. It is a bit more versatile with two bedrooms because we do have different sizes of two bedrooms. Some are larger than others.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure you know as well. More in more recent times, developers are building sub 800 square feet two bedrooms,
Yeah.
and what we're seeing is, we have like 750 square feet, two bedroom, two bathroom, possibly a den, where it's just almost the same size as some of the older one bedrooms, and having three or four people inside or roommating, it just doesn't make any sense.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm definitely an advocate myself of older places simply for the fact that they're bigger. I mean, you can get an older place and then not be bamboozled by the new build stuff. So put that quartz countertop in an older place and they kind of look the same now, right? But you have a bigger floor plan basically, right? So
Yeah, that's correct. But I mean, if we're talking about trend, I do see a stronger demand now for two bedrooms,
mhm.
than I would say 2 or 3 years ago. Um, just because of people's lifestyle changes. People need more space. People, they're moving around and or they have families living with them. So they would it would be great to have an extra room for guests to come and sleep, right? It's definitely an upward trend in the two bedroom market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with people now starting to be more prone there to share space simply for the fact that they simply can't afford it on their own these days. Like the rental prices have just gone up so significantly, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, no. So with the prices going up, do you use a rent ratio when you're trying to figure out whether to rent to somebody or not, or would you have to touch in on that?
Very good question. I mean, every property manager has their own way of qualifying tenants. I mean,
Mhm.
there's no sacred rule. I mean, as much as financial advisors may tell you, or you may read some, online outlines stating so.
Yeah.
Um, I don't personally have a ratio that I use. I do check various, various things.
Okay.
Of course, first and foremost, it's going to be um, their income amount, and then you know, if it's applicable, their savings, right?
Yeah.
Because somebody who's making 100,000 may not have any savings at all, and you would have to gauge based on experience and just based on character if it's someone that you believe it's a good fit for the landlord.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's funny like coming in about that with like a lot of servers, for instance, that some of them don't have any credit for that matter because they're leaving with good money every night, cash money, so they don't really need to worry about it, right? So
exactly.
it's interesting because I know a lot of landlords feel that the credit check is like the end all be all golden standard kind of thing, which is kind of a faux pas almost because you sort of are missing a bunch of people who would be great tenants, but you, just because of a non-credit or no credit, um, might be passing by on some good stuff, right?
Exactly. I mean, there's a stigma that the credit check is the NLB, which, you and I will tell our landlords that it's important, but it's not the NLB.
Yeah, of course not,
Um,
right?
you know,
So for
some
you deciding on a tenant, what are a couple of like red and green flags for you? Green obviously being, thumbs up, go, go, go kind of thing, and red flags being hell no. Is there any certain ones that are just sort of a that you see over and over and you're kind of like, that is a giant red flag?
well, I mean, it's without being biased and without passing judgment on certain applications, we do seek a a typical application, for a newer type of apartment. I mean,
Mhm.
a lot of these newer neighborhoods, they're going to attract people that are in professional jobs, right? Whether it be, um, remote work or in office work. People who generally have stable income and can prove their reason to want to move to a certain area and the reason to want to move to the unit, we can more or less build a picture of the application and present to the landlord for approval. Some of the red flags, I mean, unfortunately, it varies. We all have bad stories, and we all have, certain reasons why we decline applications. I don't believe we can really touch on that right now, but I would say this, some of the best tenants didn't have good credits, but their character, outshined their credit score. Some of the worst tenants had the best credits, and those people, took advantage of the system and or just pretending like they knew more than what they should know, and it turned out to be nightmares, right? So
Yeah,
we can't really paint a application with the same brush.
yeah.
Everyone's different, and we base it on experience, and that's why it's so important to work with property manager that really knows what they're doing, knows what they're saying, and can provide expertise.
Yeah, absolutely there. So moving on with the cities and stuff like that, it's quite interesting actually because as we said before, that Vancouver and West Van were the top. We have finally not taking all 5 top spots for the most expensive places in Canada. So I guess we're starting to get somewhere. So yeah, last month we took all 5 and it was like, great, we're number 1 with a bullet. So the top 5 most expensive cities, unfortunately, we're still 4 of them, which is Vancouver, West Van, North Van, Burnaby, and then in 5th place is Markham, Ontario, which I don't know anything about Ontario, but thanks guys for making us not be number 1 all the way.
Leveling the playing field.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, it's interesting. The least expensive 1-bedroom for our stats is in Langley at an average of 1809, and the most expensive is in downtown Vancouver proper, of course, at 2587. As far as it goes for your portfolio, have you seen numbers around this for the downtown? I mean, I know that you don't have anything in Langley, obviously, but have you seen anything downtown?
I have, but we really need to take these numbers with a grain of salt. Some of the, dare I say, super luxury towers that were recently completed in the last half year or half year ago, those ones are commanding, close to 26, 27 for 1 beds. But, at the same time, there's a reason why landlords are asking those prices. It's because they've closed at, I would say a very high closing price. They purchased those properties at very expensive prices, and they're also closing them at, inflationary period where their interest rates are just through the roof.
Oh,
So in
yeah.
order to make that back, they're asking a threshold that's unseen, right? And also the fact that these buildings are super luxury, so they have everything you need. Hotel inspired amenities and high-end, Gaggenau appliances and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
So to answer your question, I mean, yeah, we are seeing it in pocket buildings, but overall, in general, Vancouver market, it is heading towards that trend, but not all the rents are like that. So it's a glimpse of hope for some renters, whoever you guys are, if you guys are listening to this podcast, not all the rentals are at this level.
Yeah, for sure. Now with the rentals, I mean, and we were talking before about differentiating yourself and attracting quality tenants and all that. What are your thoughts on pets? Like yay or nay? I mean, obviously it's from case to case, but I know that a lot of landlords are concerned about pets destroying their place when reality children destroy places more than pets usually. But what are your thoughts on it as far as pet owners in rentals? Do you think it's a good idea, or what are some of the things that would give you plus and minus when trying to make that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, in general, my clients in my portfolio we're not against pets. We're not for pets in the sense that we allow pets for every single rental that gets relisted or get listed on the market.
Mhm.
We take it case by case. So as a person that's renting and a person that owns pets, I would tell them this. Put your best foot forward. It's like an interview. Have a resume for your pet. Have a photo. Photos always helps. Kind of paint a picture for the landlord to consider,
Mhm.
and obviously ask, right? Some landlords straight up they're not gonna allow it, and that's just their way of doing business, and you need to respect that. But for some people who may have some flexibility, Just put your best foot forward, give references. It's not necessarily the pet that's the issue. Sometimes it's the owners. The pets, they can only do so much. It's the owners that needs to take responsibility at the end of the day, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when it comes down to, I mean, I don't think there's a bad pet, just bad training.
That's correct. I mean, that said, some landlords are just strictly against having pets, and that's their forte. That's the way they want to conduct business, and there's not much we can really, sway them one way or another. So,
Oh, absolutely.
unfortunately,
And
that's
I
just how
mean,
the market is.
yeah, I mean, and I guess as well, I mean, you get the second deposit as well. So it also sort of helps offset that, which obviously, interestingly enough, with the interests going up, there's now 1.95 percent interest on deposits, which is
Unheard
new.
of.
Like it's
It's
been so long since this has been a thing. Um, so for the DIY landlords, I mean, they should probably put their deposit into like a high interest yield so that they can sort of offset this, of course, because you're gonna have to pay that back. And it's not from the past though. So if you were renting since 2020, you don't get the 1.95 on your interest from it. It only starts on the 23rd, or sorry, 23rd, 2023 is when that starts. So just to sort of help confusion, because I know that we had when that was first announced, we had a lot of landlords that were kind of up in arms about that and thinking like, holy cow, I've had a tenant for 10 years. Now I got to suddenly pay all this interest on there. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's definitely a new thing that's been entered into the game. Hey.
yeah, it's unheard of, like I said, and we're gonna see where this heads. But you're right, it is from 2020 and 23 only. So any tenancy that a landlord had before that, they don't pay interest on it. It'll be interesting to see what happens because it's almost an accounting nightmare because you have to account for prorated, let's say, 1.19, that's on a yearly basis. If a tenancy ends 3 or 4 months into the year 2023, the landlord is having to calculate the interest payable based on prorated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a calculator that's out there, which I'll put that in our description for this podcast episode, just so that people can find it easier, which is kind of nice. At least the government and powers that be put out a calculator to make it a lot easier for everybody to kind of deal with those quabbles that'll happen from it with people who aren't 100% sure of the rules and that. So that's a good thing that's going on there. And speaking with the rules, now that all the rentals have been opened up as of this year, what do you think that's going to affect on? Do you think that's going to really have much of an effect on the rentals? Like, do you feel that maybe is what has caused some of the downward pressure that we've seen? I mean, that whole $43, I realize it's not a huge amount, but it is something, right? Do you think that having more rental stock like that will push prices down for, Joe and Sandy average?
I do believe having more stock is good for the market. It allows it to be more competitive and gives renters more choices. I do also believe that a lot of the pricing factor now is determined by really inflationary period that we're all in,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, it's cash flow business for a lot of these owners, and unless you're a large corporation with deep pockets, the average landlord is looking at their cash flow every end of the month, right? They're just trying to make buy and pay the bills and make sure it's still worthwhile to keep these investments. So, where we're headed, we don't really know. I know we have seen a slight tick in the downtick in the pricing this month, and that could be attributed to the rental restriction lift. So I think a couple months ago, the government announced that there would be no more rentals ban in some of these
Mm-hmm.
strata corporations where they had rental restrictions. So that freed up more inventory for the market to absorb, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I mean, I think it's a step in the right direction myself. I mean, I'd been kind of advocating for it for a while. I just figure from doing the sales side, I noticed that every place that we go to, there was always a wait list for rentals. So I knew that there was obviously a pent up demand for people wanting to rent their places out. So
Hmm.
I think this is actually a pretty clever step. And I mean, we already have the building, so why not just put the bodies in it, right?
Exactly. And I think also it'll take it'll take probably another 6 months. So 3 to 6 months to really see what the stats show.
Mhm.
Government policies, well, I think they mentioned doesn't really take into effect until 6 to 9 months. That's usually when the market reacts and things kind of show whether or not it's working or not, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, because there's going to be new landlords coming into the fray and stuff, what are a couple of faux pas by landlords and tips to sort of help them maintain a good tenancy? Because we obviously see there's a lot of always battles between landlords and tenants, and it seems to be in many cases at odds when it doesn't need to be. So what would you figure are some tips for the newer landlords coming in, and maybe even the older ones who have forgotten a thing or two about how to maintain a good, healthy landlord tenancy relationship?
hmm I would say probably my top three really is to educate yourself and keep yourself current as a landlord.
Mhm.
There are always rules changing, whether it be RTB, Residential Branch, the Tenancy Act, and just municipal changes, right? Whether it be zoning, taxes, stuff like that. Just keep yourself current so you know what's going on. Number two for me is keep the relationship, right? Really work on that relationship with your tenant, make sure they're happy, ask them questions, have an open conversation, have an open dialogue, right?
Mhm.
Whether or not you guys already have existing, you know, problems that you're trying to resolve or new issues that may come up. As long as you keep that channel open and speak to each other and find some resolvement, you'll do well. And then third one for me is just make sure you know what you're doing, right? Make sure you need to, if need be, repair certain things in the property, maintain and upkeep your property so that it's up to standard. And so, your tenants aren't happy and, they're not missing out on rent because you haven't fixed certain things, right? So
Oh,
these are my top three.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think sitting on your hands for something is a terrible thing for a landlord. I mean, and yes, it's unfortunate that suddenly you have to buy a new fridge or whatever it may be. But unfortunately, like that is someone's house and where they're living currently. I mean, even though it's your investment, but I mean that is your investment. You have to keep your stuff updated and make sure that it's in working order because it's not the tenant's fault that the fridge broke, right?
Exactly. It's a living asset, right? Things are gonna break down. There's gonna be wear and tear, normal wear and tear for that matter. And that's just a part of the ownership process. You have to put effort, put some money, and understand that there are certain risks involved with renting out your property. But if you do it properly and have calculated risks, you'll reap the rewards later on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that, I mean, as long as you can last through these increases in the interest that have happened. I mean, I was looking at one of the stats that was saying that the average cost per month for a variable rate mortgage has gone up 275%,
hmm
which is an astronomical number. If you came in and were used to like 1.70 on your interest and all of a sudden you're ripped up to 6.0, it definitely you'll feel it, right?
It's a scary time. A lot of landlords they're on the fence, and you know, people are holding on for this year, I believe.
Mhm.
There may be some relief closer to the end of the year, but it's anybody's guess. Nobody has a crystal ball.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that probably a good piece of advice for most landlords, I think you'd probably agree, is to make sure that you keep a little in the tank. You know what I mean? So keep that extra $1,000 or whatever, just in case an oven or a fridge or something breaks, or heaven forbid you have a flood or anything of that nature. You got to pay your deductibles and whatnot. So it's always a good idea, I think, especially in these current times, to maybe keep a little bit in the tank just in case, right?
hmm
Hold off on that vacation this time. So, all right, man. Well, it looks like we're starting to run out of time here. So, thank you for coming on the show, Ken, and going over all the stats. If somebody wants to get a hold of you for property management and whatnot, what's a good way for them to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. They can always call me at 604-839-7368 or shoot me an email at ken@vancouverrentit.com. Again, it's ken@vancouverrentit.com.
Great, man. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. And if you guys have found this show helpful or interesting and found anything of use, please be free to subscribe and join us in a couple of weeks when we'll be going over things with Marjan, who actually is the owner of Vancouver Prestige and sort of the parent company of Vancouver Rent-It. So we'll get to see what her insights are on property management and investment in the future. My name is Haze Hartwig. This has been Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast.